in memory of Lecha Frist, of Lecha Sima Bat Zalman, Zichronah Livracha. Today is not only Lincoln's birthday, right? February 12th, 1809, but on the very same day, in a different part of the world, another pretty famous person was born, Charles Darwin. And several years ago in Ramot, I gave a whole drasha on Shabbat, on the connection between, or differences between, the Lincoln's understanding of the world, of humanity, and Darwin's. It was a nice drasha, but I'm not going to do that now. Okay, we're going to try to, Bli Neder, finish Lecha Dodi today. Right? I say that because once the Rav said at the end of the year he wanted to finish something, he didn't do it, and he set up a beit-in to do Hatarat Nedarim. So I'm telling you, I'm not sure we're going to do this, but we're going to make our gallant effort. Last week, we started doing the stanza of Shamor v'Zachor b'Dibur Echad, Hishmi'anu El HaMyuchad, Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad, L'Shem U'Teveret V'Letila. So we mentioned that Hishmi'anu El HaMyuchad, the Kadosh Baruch Hu announced this to all of us. We all heard it, and this what I was speaking about was the issue of how much of the Aseret HaDibrot. There's a little bit of an echo. How much of the Aseret HaDibrot were actually heard by OUisrael? The basic shot, basic understanding from the Psukim is that we heard all 10. Except the Chazal came along and explained that we perhaps only heard the first 2, and even the remaining 8 were heard by Kadosh Baruch Hu, by Moshe Rabbeinu, but then given over to us by Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim believes that we actually didn't hear any. What does that mean? Didn't hear any Chazal, and the Rambam brings the Gemara that says that we heard the first 2. So he said only those who are capable of being prophets, Nevi'im, actually heard the words, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Lo Yeh Lecha Elohim Achem Al Panai, which is the negation, the prohibition against idolatry is the negation of believing or accepting the existence of God. But what the Rambam believes was everybody heard like sonic booms. Kadosh Baruch Hu's voice caused sonic type of booms, which was interpreted by people that the only explanation to these sounds, because they didn't know of supersonic jets in those days, it must have come from heaven. And that's how the Rambam understands the Pasuk, which we'll read this coming Shabbat. This is not good. Yeah, this is not good. Yeah, it's just making a little bit of an echo. I'll try to put it down. Is it better now?
Maybe it's a holy voice we can't decipher.
There you go. There you go. It's a bat kol min hashamayim. Thank you. That was good. I'm going to write that one down. This, I think, is a little bit better. I'm going to stay away from the microphone. Stay away from the microphone. Okay. The Rambam believes that the only explanation that people had for these sounds were some divine cause. And that's how Rambam understands the Pasuk in Parshat Yitro at the end of the Aseret HaDibrot, V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Now, we generally don't see sounds. So what does it mean, V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot? The Rambam says, we saw and appreciated the fact that through these sounds, Kadosh Baruch Hu existed. That's his way of understanding that Pasuk. V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. So you have differences of opinion as to what OUisrael actually heard at Har Sinai. But at least from the simple pshat, Hishmi'anu El HaMyuchad, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave over this to all of us. Hishmi'anu means to us. He was mashmi'ah to us, lanu, Shamor v'Zachor. Except that what we have in the Chumash is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat HaKadsho, and what we have in Parshat Vet Chanan and Sefer Dvarim, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat HaKadsho. Now it is true, famous midrash, Zachor v'Shamor b'Dibur Echad, right? This I have on the source number 2 from the Gemara, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. It appears in various places. Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad nemru, that what you have in the first set of the Seret Dibrot and the second were said in one utterance. Masha eina peh yichola ledaber, a human being can't do that. Ve'eina ozen yichola lishmoa, the human ear cannot comprehend two things simultaneously. But we learn various halachot from this. This wasn't a Kadosh Baruch Hu, as if to say, flexing his muscles, that he could do something that we can't do. Came to teach us the very halakha that whoever is involved in Shmirat Shabbat, guarding oneself from the prohibited activities, including men and women, are also involved in Zacharat Yom HaShabbat the Kacho, which is the mitzvah of Kiddush, Friday night, men and women. So that's a halacha that's derived from Zachor v'Shamor b'Dibur Echad. But why does Shlomo Alevi Al-Kabatz reverse the order? Shamor v'Zachor b'Dibur Echad. So one of the classic reasons is he needs the shin for the acrostic, for his name. If you look at source number 3, you see something fascinating in the Ramban, in this week's parasha, in Yitro. U'b'midrasho shel Rab Nechunya ben Hakaneh, in the Medrash compilation of Rab Nechunya ben Hakaneh, Hiskiru od sod gadol, a secret. A secret by the Ramban doesn't mean, shh, don't tell anybody. It means it's a Kabbalistic idea. That's what he's trying to tell you. It's a Kabbalistic idea. Usually the Ramban will introduce something of a Kabbalistic nature by saying, Val derech ha'emet. That doesn't mean that what he said before wasn't true. It simply is a code word, and now I'm moving over to give a Kabbalistic explanation. I heard from Rabbi Lichtenstein Zatzal, the great Rosh Hashiva of Gush, the Rav son-in-law, who spoke to Nechama Leibovitz, Alei Shalom, about the Al Derech HaEmet of the Rambans. And Rav Aaron's question was, if you don't go into the Kabbalah, either because you're not familiar with how Kabbalah works, you just want to gloss over it, you just want to read the pshat of the Ramban, are you missing out on anything of the Ramban's pshat if you put parentheses around the Kabbalistic add-ons? And the Chama said, you're not missing anything. The pshat is the pshat as an autonomous perush, and then Ramban glosses over to Al Derech HaEmet. And Rav Aaron Lichtenstein felt that Nechama's explanation was as authoritative as we're going to get. So that's important to know. So here, Ramban is not giving his own explanation, Al Derech HaEmet. He's quoting a medrash that gave a sod gadol, b'zachor v'shamor, v'ala klal tiyeh hazchira b'yom v'ashmira b'layla, which means that we know Shabbat has 24 hours. I know it's 25 hours today. That's because we're machmirim. We start from sundown, but we end it after nightfall, after 3 stars. So you get yourself an extra hour in the package. And that's because of our inability to put our fingers on precisely when the night begins and when the night ends. So halachically, there's a little bit of a twilight zone from Shkia, from sundown. So we are machmer from Shkia and the night, Friday night, and we're machmer not to end Shabbat at sundown, but to keep it rolling another so on. And that's a machloket how much the so on is. But most of us have about a half an hour after sundown, and maybe a little bit more. Some people have 72 minutes after sundown. That's a Rabbeinu Tam, and so on. But whatever it is, it's a little extra. So it's almost 25 hours. But in theory, Shabbat is 24 hours. Vayerev vayvoke yom echad, vayerev vayvoke yom sheni, and so on. It's 24 hours in theory. So if a person does a malacha of Shabbat, if he takes a pen and starts writing 2 letters Friday night, or he does it Shabbos morning, it's the same Aveira. There's no difference with regard to the sanctity of Shabbat. But on a Kabbalistic level, there is a difference between the nighttime and the daytime. The nighttime is called Shamor, and the daytime is called Zachor. So now we need some explanation what this means. But one thing it does answer, why Shlomo Levi Al-Kabatz writes the Shamor before the Zachor, because in this chronological sequential order of time, the night of Shabbat comes before the morning of Shabbat, and now he's standing at the night of Shabbat, and therefore it's Shamor, followed by Zachor. That's the Kabbalistic reason why he wrote it. Of course, he needs the shin, so it fits in nicely. But what does the Ramban say? Well, get the Kiddush in the morning. Hang in there. Don't jump the gun. Let's see what this is. The Ramban's going to refer to the Kiddush in the morning. So it says, Ala klal tiyeh hazchira bayom, the zohar is the daytime, but the shmirah is the nighttime. This is something that the Gemara says, Maseh Baba Kama, she'omrim be'erev Shabbat, boi kala. The idea of going out and meeting the Shabbat is something alluded to by the Friday night, that we do something. Boi kala. We're inviting. Bo neitzei likrat Shabbat malka. Let's go out to visit the Shabbat, to invite the Shabbat in. V'yikru lebirkat hayom, and we call the Kiddush in the morning Kiddushay Rabbah. Now, those people, that phrase is found in the last parak of Masechet Pesachim in the context of Leila Seder, but it refers to every Shabbos morning's Kiddush as well, Kiddushay Rabbah, which means Kiddush HaGadol. Most of the commentators in the Gemara say it's euphemistic, because if you look at the text of the Friday night Kiddush and you size it up against the text of the Shabbos morning Kiddush, which is the big Kiddush and which is the small Kiddush, it's clear that the nighttime Kiddush is the big Kiddush and the morning Kiddush is the baby Kiddush, because the Rambam has that the morning Kiddush is just Bar Peragafen. So fine, so we've added a few psukim to go along with it. Some people say Al Kain Beirachat Hashem, some say Zachor Yom Shabbat Kachotza, some say V'Shom Bnei Yisrael Shabbos. People, have whatever they say. And I remember when the Rav spoke about this issue of Kiddush, it was on the Yartzeit Shir Gimel Shvat in 1979. So he said that my grandfather, my Zayda Rav Chaim, he did like the Rambam. He just said Baruch Bergofen, which opened up the 3,000 people are sitting there. Okay, that's what your grandfather did. What do you do? So one guy had the guts to yell out, what does the Rav do? So the Rav looked and he says, why say these psukim beforehand? Why? So the Rav gave two answers. One was completely humoristic. He says, because it's so printed in the benches. And everybody cracked up. It was 3,000 people doubling over and laughing, because everybody knew that wasn't an answer. It's printed in the benches. It looked in the benches. That's what he said, printed in the benches. But then he says, don't you ever forget, I had another grandfather. That was very telling, because the Rav grew up in the town of Pruzhan, where his grandfather, maternal grandfather, Reb Elia Feinstein, was the Rav. And as a child, he heard his grandfather say Kiddush, and so on. That's what he grew up. Later in life, he hears that his Zayda and Bris did it differently, but that didn't make a difference anymore. The Kiddush was already implanted in his head. And he basically, in that case, was teaching us, we're all hybrids. You have two grandparents. Of course, most of your traditions come from your paternal grandfather, but occasionally, minhagim sneak into the family through the maternal grandfather. It can happen. And it's not to be, brushed aside. So what does the Rav explain in that shir? He says that there are two plans for Geula. The two plans for Geula are already spelled out in the drasha in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Chet, on the pasuk in Yeshayahu, Ani Hashem bi'ita achishena. I am God, in its time will hasten the Geula. Okay? So that's what they call in literature an oxymoron. If it's in its time, then it's not hastened. If it's hastened, it's not on schedule. So what does that mean? Accelerated. If it's accelerated, it's not on schedule. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha, there's no problem here. There's one possibility where Am Yisrael will do tshuva, will be a mass tshuva movement. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will kick into gear the accelerated mode of Geula. But if Am Yisrael does not do tshuva, the Geula is going to come anyway, but in a scheduled way. And interpreted by most, the unscheduled, accelerated way means something, miraculous. It's going to be, in Hebrew we say al-tivi, miraculous. And if it's going to be a scheduled way, it's going to be through the normal course of geopolitical events and so on. It's going to happen anyway, but it won't happen, in a miraculous way. But it'll happen anyway. But you see here, Chazal were talking about the two different possibilities, and the reason why they had confidence that there were two possibilities, because various Nevi'im spoke in different tones. Some spoke in very miraculous ways of Geula, and some spoke of very natural ways of Geula. You can posit Yeshayahu one way and Yecheskel Hanavi the other way, and they're both right. We'll see what's going to happen. We'll see what's going to happen. So this is Ani Hashem bi'ita achishena. So the Rav says that the Kabbalists understood that the nighttime represented Am Yisrael in the Galut, doing something about it. The idea of boi chala, we're going to come out and we're going to schlep the Rabbi Shalom into the picture and bring the Geula, not by divine power, but by human initiative. Human initiative is going to bring about the Geula. That is the Kiddush that we're making Friday night. We, Am Yisrael, are saying, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mikadesh Shabbat. In the nighttime, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in a stance of Shmirah, as if to say, standing on the sideline, waiting and watching to see if Am Yisrael is going to make a move. And we have to make the move Friday night. But if we don't succeed, and already Jewish history moves onward, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises that he will bring the Gula anyway, all by himself. And this is the stance of Zechirah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the morning, in the daytime. He will be the active partner. Am Yisrael will then recede to the sidelines. So what is the Kiddush in the morning? You know what's missing in the Kiddush in the morning? Kiddush. And I'm not talking about the cholent or the kugel or the wine. The bracha, Mekadesh Shabbat. You're calling it Kiddush, but where's the Mekadesh Shabbat? The only thing you have there is a bar paragofen. So you have Sukkah before, that's, as we said, the printer printed it, fine. But Kiddush is bar paragofen. Where's the mitzvah of Kiddush? So Ramban says that the Kiddushei Rabbah in Aramaic is not the way others thought. It's really the baby Kiddush, but we don't want to insult it, so we call it the great Kiddush. That's the euphemism. The Ramban says it's Kiddush HaGadol. Gadol is a nickname of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hakel, HaGadol, HaGibor, HaNorah. Kadosh Baruch Hu has all kinds of nicknames. So the Kiddush in the morning is the Kiddush of the Gadol. Who's making Kiddush in the morning? HaKadosh Baruch Hu's doing the Kiddush, because he's bringing the Gula. And the only thing we have to do is say amen to that. So we do it on a bar paragofen, on a cup of wine. But we're not making Kiddush. The Kiddush in the morning is the Kiddush that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making. And this is the Zohar at Yom HaShabbat HaKacho in the Kabbalistic way of seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing the Gula in the morning. And hence you have the nighttime stance of Am Yisrael being active, or let's use the phrase proactive, when we're in the middle of the Galut. If it doesn't work, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to do the job anyway. This also might lend explanation to the seeming contradiction, what we read last Shabbat in the end of Bishalach and Mechemet Amalek, Ki macho emche etzech Amalek mikachat shamayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I will eradicate Amalek. Yet in Parshat Ki Tetzei, in what we call Parsha Zohar, it says, Timche etzech Amalek. You, Am Yisrael, are ordained to eradicate Amalek. Well, let's get it right. Who's going to do it? So much so, there were some of those who counted mitzvahs didn't count the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek into the scheme of 613, because if a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to do it, it's not our mitzvah. The Rambam does count it. So what does it mean? It means we have to do our best every generation. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu says there'll be a war against the Amalekim every generation, it means that the previous generation didn't succeed. But they may have tried. They may have tried to do their best. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Milchama Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. Every generation is going to have its Amalek. Beseder. But at the end of the day, as the Paitan says we end the Seder with this in the song of Ata Kadosh Baruch Hu v'shachat l'malach hamavet, in the Chad Gadya, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to deal the death blow at the end. At the end, the Amalekim are going to get it. That's Macho Emche Ezech Amalek. So you have here the two possibilities. Am Yisrael is supposed to do its best, and if we don't succeed, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to wrap it up. Ki Macho Emche Ezech Amalek. And that's exactly the way the Rav understood what the Ramban is saying here. Why the nighttime? This is the sod. This is the secret, the Kabbalistic secret of what Shamor v'Zachor is all about in this reversed order from Zachor v'Shamor. Shamor v'Zachor v'Dibur Echad. And one last word about introduces with the drasha from Masechet Sanhedrin of Ani Hashem bi'ita achishana. So my son Eitan explained once that you can read the word bi'ita not with a tuf, which means eight, which means season or time, but you read it with a tet, which means a kick. He says when Am Yisrael gets a kick, then Achishena, then things are going to start rolling. Well, read the newspapers today, Chutz La'aretz, you see they're getting a big kick. Right. That's right. We're getting kicked also. Fine. Achishena. And then the idea of Vayashem L'melech al kol haaretz bayomo Yashem echad shmo echad is the continuation of the first stanza, Hashem echad shmo echad, which means Shlomo Alevi al-Kabatz is now bringing us into the spirit of what this poem is, and that is, and we've said this already with regard to others we wrote, that every Shabbat ushers in the spirit of the end of days. And this pasuk is in Zechariah, Perek Yud Daled, after the Milchemet Gog uMagog, that last war that's being predicted by both Yechezkel and Zechariah. The Shem ul Teferet ul Tila. I give you the pasuk from Dvarim, Parshat Kitavo, where you have that phrase L'Tila u'L'Shem ul Teferet. The poets, as you know, flip the words many times around, but it's from there, and it means that in those days, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be universally acknowledged, universally praised, and so on. And we say this in the Kaddish when we say Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam U'Le'mei Maya, which is a Aramaic variant of Yehi Shem Hashem Mevorach Me'ata Ve'ad Olam. That's what Yehi Shmei Rabba was, in case you never knew. Yehi Shem Hashem Mevorach Me'ata Ve'ad Olam. And in those days, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be Yitparech and Yishtabach, Yitpa'er, Yitromei, Yitaseh, Yitadar, Yitalel, Yitalal, Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shmei Dekut Shabrichu, Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means it's going to be universally acknowledged all over. That which Avraham Avinu started, Bet HaNefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, right? Rashi says Avraham converted the men and Sarah converted the women. That means the word, to spreading the word of monotheism, of acknowledging HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in this world. The culmination is going to be Vaya Hashem L'melech al kol haaretz. He will be acknowledged throughout the world. And every year on Rosh Hashanah, we daven for this. This is the bracha of Malchiot. Meloch hakol ha'olam kulo b'chvodecha. Melech hakol haaretz mekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron. Okay, next stanza. Likrat Shabbat l'chu v'nelcha. We're now looking at Shabbat coming in. Let's go towards it. Let's go out towards Shabbat. Kihi mikor habracha. Shabbat is the source of our blessings. Now this is going to be something very similar to what Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin wrote in the Ya'ech Sof we did about a month ago plus. And I'll just read the line from Ya'ech Sof. Shisha levilti ties sagur mehem shisha yamim hamikablim kedusha mishabat kochecha. We say that the 6 days of the week nourish their sanctity from the day of Shabbat. And when we did that section, I quoted a whole point from the Zohar that actually spelled it out very carefully. The source of bracha of Shabbat is Vayivarach Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i V'Kadesh Oto Kivo Shabbat Mikol Melachto Shabara Elohim Lasot. So that you have the source number 6, the source from Bereshit. That's obviously the source of Shabbat being the source of bracha. It's inculcated with bracha, but the idea that it is the source of bracha for all of the weekdays, so this is based on the Kabbalistic Zohar, which we have already done with regard to Kayach Sof, and that every day, and that's one of the reasons that when we say Shir Shayom, Hayom Yom Revi'i B'Shabbat, Hayom Yom Chamishi B'Shabbat, every day there's something of Shabbat embedded in the weekday, and that gave some type of spiritual energy. Shabbat gives off spiritual energy to all of the days of the week. Fine. Now we continue in the poem. Meirosh mikedem nusucha. Kedem is not only the name of a grandson of mine, but it's also brings us back to Gan Eden, right? But it's also a grape juice. Right. Why do you think they call it Kedem wine? Because there's an opinion, it's Gemara in the Sefer Brachot Daf that says that the tree of Gan Eden was a geffen. There are 4 different opinions. What was the tree, the fruit of the Gan Eden? I'll tell you which one it isn't. It's not an apple. Apple entered into the picture through Christian art. And how did that happen? Because of one of the opinions that the fruit of the tree was an etrog. And the translation in the Targum HaShivim, the Septuagint, of tapuchim in Shir Hashirim was etroga. So the tapuach of Shir Hashirim is not the apple, the pink apple that you buy here in the supermarket. It was an etrog. So the etrog was somehow confused with the tapuach, and therefore in Christian Europe, the tapuach became the figure in the picture, in all the paintings of Gan Eden. But it wasn't a tapuach. That was William Tell. He had the tapuach. But Adam Rishon and Chava, they were either plucking etzroigim, or they were plucking grapes, or plucking figs, or plucking wheat. So of course, wheat, is that a fruit? That the Gemara is that kasha already also. Good. But it's not an apple. Fine. So because the grapes might be one of them, so it's possible. And in Lecha Dodi, Mirosh Mikedem Nisucha, Shabbat was on God's mind from way back. Way back. Mikedem means like way back, way back. So we say this in the bracha under the chuppah. No? No, you mentioned Began Eden Mikedem, which means we're trying to have the Chatan and Kala replay the first steps of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden. Or hopefully your home will be a Gan Eden. I mean, you can make a lot of drushes here. Why that Mikedem was brought into. And what does it mean? Chadesh Yamenu Ke Kedem. What does that mean? Like generally translated, that's a pasuk in Eicha, the end of Parakeh. That means like the way once upon it was. Basically, it means let's go back to the first Beit HaMikdash. We're not interested in going back to the second Beit HaMikdash that was flawed. There were a lot of flaws in the second Beit HaMikdash. Let's go back to the way it was originally, the first Beit HaMikdash. Some say that it means let's go back to the day where there were no Chata'im. Because when Adam and Chava were created, there was no not yet sin. It didn't happen yet. So let's go back to that era, Kikedem, to Gan Eden. So what? No mothers-in-law. Okay, fine. But here it means Berosh Mikedem Nesucha means way back, from day one, as if to say, Sof Maaseh b'machshavat tchila. Even though Shabbat comes into the picture at the end of creation, it was on the table at the beginning of creation. It means that Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't work 6 days and then, you know what? Time for a day off. No. It was pre-programmed that there was going to be a seventh day. That's what the Paitan says. Mirosh Mikedem Nesucha. It's been established from way back. Sof Maaseh, it happens at the end, but b'machshavat tchila, it was thought about up front. Okay. Then the Paitan moves over to the history. The Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. The Shekhinah is in Galut. We've seen this already. The idea that in the days of Galut, the presence of God goes down to Galut with Am Yisrael. Mikdash Melech Ir Melucha, the great Beit HaMikdash, the royal Beit HaMikdash, in the city that houses the Beit HaMikdash, Yerushalayim. Kumi tzei mitoch ha'hafecha. Everything is turned upside down. It means it was vandalized, destroyed, burned, ransacked. Kadosh Baruch Hu should come out of it. Now that phrase, kumi tzei, if you look at the daf, source number 7 from Amos, ubet el lo tosif od lehinavei, ki mikdash melechu ubeit meluchahi. But the phrase mikdash melech melucha ir melucha is found in Amos, and you see that Shlomo Levi Al-Kabatz has got the whole Tanakh opened in front of him. He does not have a computerized, digitalized Tanakh that he can push a button and see, Ir Melucha. Anybody ever say that before? Bingo, in 2 seconds it comes up on the screen. He's working from his head with a full knowledge of Tanakh. And then in Parshat Vayera, it says, Vayetze Lot, Vayadaber el Chatanav. This is Lot in Sdom. And it says, Vayomer, Kumu tz'u min hamakom hazeh, ki mashchit Hashem et ha'ir, vahi ki mitzachek be'einav chatanav. You have when the malach who comes to save Lot, he says, pick yourself up and remove yourself from this place. Kumu tze'u. And this phrase is the only time in Tanakh, in the Chumash, that it's found. Shlomo Alevi Al-Kabatz takes this, Mikdash Melech Ir Melucha, Kumi Tzi'i Mitoch Ha'afecha. Why is it Kumi Tzi'i, and there it says Kumu Tze'u? Because he was a Galatiana, right? He read it like a Galatiana. My grandfather would have read it also, Kimi Tzi'i, right? But beside that, that's irrelevant why he changes the tense, because he's talking about himself now. Kumi Tzi'i, let's get up, let Yerushalayim stand up. Mitoch ha'afecha. Rav lav shevet be'emek habacha. It's enough already in the valley of tears. V'hu yachmol alayach emla, and he HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have mercy, compassion on us. This Rav Lach Shevet is also a biblical phrase taken out of the page of, I don't have it on the page here, but it's from Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Dvarim. Rav Lach, he says it's enough. Shevet Bahar Hazeh, Su'u Kulechem Ba'amidbar, Derech Yam Suf. The phrase Rav Lach means enough. It's too much. Can't handle this anymore. Rav Lach Shevet Be'emek Habacha. Too much in this valley of tears. Hu yachmol alayich emla, and he should have compassion on us, and so on. And now he moves into a series of stanzas that are reworked psukim from Yeshayahu. So let's see it in the psukim first. Source number 9, 10, and 11, and 12, and 13. And they all come from, one is from Tehillim, but the others are Yeshayahu. He is reworking Yeshayahu, the famous psukim that we read in the Haftarot after Tisha B'Av. Between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, you have the 7 Haftarot of consolation, Nechama, and they're all from Yeshayahu. And here in Perek Nun Bet, it says, Uri, Uri, livshi uzech Tzion. Wake up. Livshi bigdei tefratech. Get dressed. Put on the clothing of royalty again. Yerushalayim mirakodesh. Ki lo yosif yavo bach od arel v'tamei. No longer will be the defiled tamei people come to you. It's going to be a purified city. Hitnari me'afar kumi. Get up, wake up. The idea of slumber identified with sin and galut is well known in Tanakh as a metaphor. Yonah Hanavi, right? He goes down to the bottom of the ship to take a Schlafstunde. All of a sudden it's 2 in the afternoon. He's got to take a Schlafstunde. No. He's running away from the fact that he's running away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the sailors come down and they say, Ben Adam, Malecha Nirdam, Kum Kral Elohecha. What are you sleeping now? Get up and call to your God. And the Sfaradim took this line as the opening number of Slichot. Ben Adam, Malecha Nirdam, Kum Kira B'tachanunim. That's how they start saying Slichos from the beginning of Elul for 40 days. Wake up from the slumber. And the Rambam says this too, and the Rambam usually doesn't throw in homiletics, but he says in the 3rd chapter of Hilchot Tshuva, Aval Pishet Kiyat Shofar B'Rosh Hashanah Gzerat HaKatuv, even though the mitzvah of blowing shofar Rosh Hashanah is in the Chumash, Remez Yeshbo, there's an illusion, a homiletic illusion. Klomar Uru Yishenim Mishnatchem, wake up, Veikitzu Mitardem Atchem, wake up from your slumber. The only reason that you've sinned is because you've fell into some shluf hour and you didn't realize what you're doing. And the shofar is there to jolt us. It's an alarm clock. It's an alarm. It's a siren to wake us up. So this is the Paitan using all of these images from Yeshayahu Hanavi. Hitnari me'afar kumi, Yushalayim, hitpatri mosrei tzavarech, shviya bat Zion. The Tillim phrase, we'll see how he uses it in a second. Korva el nafshi ge'ala. He uses it at the end of one of the stanzas. And then 11, hitori, kumi Yerushalayim. Same phrase. Get up, wake up. And in 12, Yeshayahu Perek Samach, kumi ori, kiva orech, ukvod Hashem alayach zarach. Get up, because I'm shining on you. The honor, the glory of God is now shining on you. Wake up. Uri, Dvorah, you have in Shirat Dvorah that we just read in the Haftarah in Parshat Bishalach from Shirat Dvorah. Uri, Dvorah, Uri, Dabri Shir. The idea of wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. This is something that's known. And then Yeshayahu Perek Nundalin 14, Al tir'i ki lo tevoshi v'lo tikolmi. There's nothing to be embarrassed. You will not be ashamed any longer. Ki lo tachbiri ki boshet alumayach tishkachi v'cherpat alumutayach lo tiskri od. You'll never be reminded any longer that you were widowed and so on without your Beit HaMikdash. It's going to be behind us. All the sadness is going to be forgotten. I mean, isn't this beautiful what Yeshayahu was telling us? We're going to be in an era where we're not going to remember any longer the hard times. Today, it's part of our psyche that we remember the hard times. It's actually part of the mitzvah to remember the hard times. In Leila Seder, Matchil Bignut, Umisayim B'Shavach, you're not just going to talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, you're going to talk about the Shiabud, the Avdut, the slavery in Egypt. It's part of us. When you say Hallel, fine, Hodu L'Hashem Ki Tov T'lom Chasdo. But let's remember, Min HaMeitzar Karati, we're still in trouble. Ana Hashem Oshiana. One day it's going to be different. Right, with Amalek, because Amalek keeps repeating. Right. So all of these phrases, Ma tishtoch achi, Ma tehemi, let's see how the Paitan uses all of these. From the stanza, Hitnari me'afra kumi, livshi bigdei tefartechami, restating the pasuk. Get up from the dirt. Wake up, adorn yourself with the royal clothing. Al Yad ben Yishai Beit Halachmi. Who's that? That's David HaMelech from Beit Lechem. Ben Yishai is David HaMelech from Beit Lechem, Beit Lachmi. He's just keeping the rhyme scheme. Korval Nafshi Gala, that came from Tillim. That please bring that Geula Nafshi to. It's a player, it's not only to usher in the Geula, but I should feel redeemed as well. Korva el nafshi ge'ala, that I should feel redeemed with your, bringing us out of it. Hit ori, wake up. Kiva orech kumi ori. He simply takes the pasuk and reverses the syntax. But it's lifted. Yeshayahu would have had a good lawyer, he could have sued him for plagiarism. Mamash. You know who else needed a good lawyer? The Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo. Somebody in Bar Ilan did a survey of all the words in Shulchan Aruch, and 30% is from the Rambam. Can you imagine you writing a book and 30% of the book comes from some other guy? You're going to get a lawyer's letter, for sure. 30%? 30% of the Shulchan Aruch is the Rambam's language.
How long till the copyright expires?
Right, okay, so the copyright might not be. Good. So here, he's rewording, maybe he flipped the words because he didn't want to get a lawyer's letter. He flips the words. Uri, shir daberi, kvod Hashem alayach nigla. Straight out of Yeshayahu as we saw. Wake up, the glory of God is already on you. Lo tevoshi v'lo tikolmi. Do not be embarrassed. Do not. Ma tishtoch achi u'ma tehemi. What are you dropping down from the word as if to say, why are you in collapsed mode? Why are you weeping? Bach yechasu aniyei ami. Kadosh Baruch Hu will take you under the wings. And that also was a pasuk somewhere. Where do I see it?
16.
Right, 16. Ma yeneh malachei goy ki Hashem yisad Tzion uva yechasu aniyei amo. He took it straight out of this pasuk from Yeshayahu. Bach yechasu aniyei ami v'nivnita ir al tila. That's out of Yirmiyahu, so 17. V'nivnita ir al tila, and everything should be rebuilt from ground zero up. It's a great translation of mine. From ground zero, v'nivnita ir al tila, from the bottom up. Just build it up once again. Now he's going to turn around and say something that many of the other poets also did, and that is that we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to deal a blow to all our enemies who are holding up the process. Those Amalekim. Vayu limshisa shosayach. What is mishisa? What is shosayach? Also to mean smash. Those who are trying to smash us should be smashed. V'rachaku kol mevalayach, and Kadosh Baruch Hu should drive out all of those who are causing us to somehow depreciate. And this comes out of the psukim, source number 18 from Yirmiyahu, Vayu shosayach limshisa, v'chol bozazayich etain lavos. This is called midah keneged midah, a measure for a measure, an eye for an eye. I remember the Rav once, and he gave, I wasn't there, I was 4 years old, but 1956, when the Rav spoke the famous speech, Kol Dodi Dofek, which became a manifesto of his on religious Zionism. It was Yom Ha'atzmaut talk of 1956 at Yeshiva University. So there, he gives 6 times he's hearing the knock, Kol Dodi Dofek, with the emergence of the state of Israel. And one of them was that even though in the halachic sense, an eye for an eye doesn't mean that the judges take the guy's eye out. It means there's a financial assessment of the difference between a person with 2 eyes as opposed to 1 eye, and that becomes the financial value, the monetary value, and that's what he pays. Ayin tachat ayin mamon. But the Rav said, when it comes to those who are attacking us in Eretz Yisrael, ayin tachat ayin mamish. We have to take out the eye. You have to give it back to them. He was very, very militant in that particular speech. But here, Yirmiyahu is saying the same thing. Vayu shosayich limishisa. Those are trying to bash us, they'll get bashed. Those are trying to steal our property. Biza is booty. Take our things. Attain levels. I'll have it that we'll take their stuff. Because whatever they try to do to us, we will give it right back to them. And that's what the poet says. Vayalim shisa shosayich v'rachaku kol mivalayich. Now comes the message of Shabbos. Yasis alayich Elohayich kemisos chatan al kala. I mean, this is also from Yeshayahu in Perek Samach Bet, source number 20. Umisos chatan al kala yasis alayich Elohayich. A lot of nigunim were composed around this. Right? We sing this at weddings. Yasis alayich Elohayich kemisos chatan al kala. A lot of times it's actually sung right after the chuppah, right? The band goes into Yasis alayich, and so on. And this means that the wedding is happening. The kala is a kadosh baruch hu, the shechina represent bringing in the Shabbat. We are the chatan, and it is now going to be a joyous moment. Yasis, what it means? From the word sason. The word sason. That God should bring upon us the sason and simcha. So it's yasis, it's in the command. Yasis alayich Elohayich, the way the chatan and kala are rejoicing. Yaminu smol tifrotzi. Let's branch out. This is also based on Yeshayahu, branching out. Ki yaminu smol tifrotzi. It's also based on the pasuk, harchivi mekom oholech. Your tent is going to expand in the way Einstein saw the expansion of the universe. Yerushalayim, as its borders will expand. And everybody will see that this is going to be an expansion. You know, the Kabbalists actually say that in Messianic times, the whole Eretz Yisrael is going to be Yerushalayim, and the whole world is going to be Eretz Yisrael. That's a very problematic idea, because it negates halakha. Because if that happens, then there's no chutz la'aretz. No chutz la'aretz, there's a question, what does Kedushat Eretz Yisrael mean? There has to be something that remains outside of Eretz Yisrael. And it also gives an excuse for people not to come on Aliyah, because they're waiting for Mashiach. And then Mashiach, months he becomes Eretz Yisrael, so why do I have to move?
Somebody should tell Trump that we have to leave some land outside.
Right, so he'll tell you to leave New Zealand. He'll leave New Zealand and Antarctica. Okay. Al Yadish ben Partzi, again, a reference to who is the son of Peretz? Zerach and Peretz from Parshat Vayeshev, the son of Yehuda and Tamar. So who becomes Peretz? Peretz, ve'ela todot Peretz, the last 2 psukim of Megillat Ruth. Right? Ve'yishai holid et David. So Ben Peretz becomes the Peretz was the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of David HaMelech. Right? Ve'ela todot Peretz. Peretz holid Salman, Oved et Yishai, Yishai Oved et David. So it means David HaMelech again. So before he referred to Al Yad ben Yishai Beit Halachmi from Beit Lechem, and now he's calling David HaMelech ben Partzi, V'nismecha v'nagila. Now that doesn't come from the Psalm Hava Nagila, but that comes from Yeshayahu, Perek Hey. If you look at source 23, we say this pasuk in Hakafos, before Hakafot, 23. Ve'amar bayamahu, Yinei Elokeinu zeh, kivinu lo v'yoshienu, zeh Hashem kivinu lo, nagila v'nismecha yishuato. So it comes from there, and now comes the climactic ending, where in Tzfat, they would go out to the field and say this Lecha Dodi, but we're lazy. So we stay in shul, but we stand up and turn around to the door. Last week I explained, turn around to the west direction or to the door, where in Europe that meant the same thing, because the Mizrach was there in Kodesh, towards Eretz Israel. So the door in the back of the shul was the west. Now in Eretz Israel, everything's all messed up because we built shuls all over the place, and you don't face Mizrach, you face Yerushalayim. So if you're in Gush Etzion, you face north. If you're in Bet El, you face south. And if you're in Ma'ale Adumim, you face west, because you're facing Yerushalayim. So the question is, where do you turn around? So according to those who say you turn around to the door, makes no difference what the direction. According to those who say you turn around to the west, then you're not turning around to the door. You have to see what direction your shul is built to turn west, and that causes some confusion in shuls. What most shul people do today, they carried in their baggage their minhag of their grandparents, they turn around. So they turn around, and then sometimes not necessarily to the door and not necessarily to the west, but they turn around. So, all right, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu will do the gyroscope and make that it should work in the right direction. But at this point, we all stand up and say, Bo'i v'shalom ateret ba'ala. Ateret ba'ala is a phrase out of Mishlei in Perek Yud Bet. It's not the Eshet Chayil. It says, Eshet Chayil ateret ba'ala. I said it's not the Eshet Chayil Perek that we sing, which is the 31st Perek of Mishlei, the last Perek of Mishlei. This comes from the 12th chapter of Mishlei, where it says, Eshet Chayil ateret ba'ala. She is the crown of her husband. I mean, there's some people, when they receive awards, they get up and they say, it's all my wife. She deserves everything, right? There's a reason that I dedicated my Rambam book to my wife. There's a reason, And no, in all sincerity. Right? What?
You better.
I bet. You said it, not me. You said it. Right? I refer to my wife as Terach Chayai. The flower, and I got some comments about that. To say that it's very nice.
No, it's beautiful.
It's beautiful, very poetic.
Absolutely.
Sure. And I mean it. I meant it lovingly, for sure. So ateret ba'ala. So Bo'i v'shalom ateret ba'ala. The crown of the husband. That's the Shabbat, the Shekhinah. Who is it? Gam b'simcha. The different girsaot, b'tzohala or berina u'v'tzala or b'simcha berina u'v'tzala. So some people do a compromise. They say on Friday night they say gam berina u'v'tzala, but on Friday night of Yom Tov they say gam b'simcha u'v'tzala because it's Yom Tov. Some Sidurim. I'm not sure that Shlomo Levi Al-Kabatz made that distinction in the manuscripts that we have of this, and we do have some. It says gam b'simcha berina u'b'tzahala. There are three phrases that I mentioned here. Toch emunei am sgula. This is through what does it mean, emunei am sgula? The faith, what does it mean, the faith? Here, many people who've commented on the Lecha Dodi have made reference to the fact that on Shabbat there is a neshama yetera. There's an extra dimension of neshama that we have every single Shabbos. So the Gemara talks about this in the source 25. Amr Rav Shimon ben Lakish, neshama yetera noten HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'adam erev Shabbat. Everybody receives an extra dimension of neshama, of spirituality on Shabbat. Umotzei Shabbat, he takes it away. And some say that's the reason that we smell the psamim by Avdallah, because with the loss of the neshama yetera, you're ready to faint. And what do you do when somebody faints? You give him something strong to smell, so he revives himself. That's one of the reasons for besamim. And the Rashi tells us that the Neshamaya Terah has to do with gastronomy, has to do with appetite for food. That normally we eat 2 meals a day. This is the way it was until modern days. And the way we celebrate Shabbat is by having an extra meal. So we call it Suda Shlishit. Now, most people's systems aren't ready to handle a third meal. So you have to have a Neshamaya Terah to allow you to be able to ingest a third meal. That's how Rashi understood it. It only has to do with eating, right? Very Jewish approach. It has to do with pressing extra on Shabbat. But that's not how the Kabbalists saw it. And they saw it as an added dimension of spirituality. And Toch Emunei Am Segula, by accepting this additional dimension of spirituality, Friday night, we are welcoming the Shekhinah into our homes. Boi kala, boi kala. Now this is, and some have this ending, boi kala Shabbat al Ketah. This we actually said another time, the Shabbat queen should enter into our homes. Fine. Now I raised a question last week, and we'll end with this point, that on Shabbos Yom Tov, Friday night happens to be, let's say, Shabbat, and Yom Tov, it's also Yom Tov. It happens a lot, right? The first night of Sukkot, the first night of Pesach can be Friday night. So Ashkenazim delete the entire Kabbalat Shabbat. Just say Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat by accepting Shabbat, and let's move on to Baruch Hu, and that's it. But Ashkenaz, Sfaradim, or even Nusach Sfarad, have an abbreviated Sukkot Zimra. They don't say L'chun Ranana, but they do say the Perek Kaftet, Mizmor David Havul Hashem B'nei Elim, and they have an abbreviated Lecha Dodi, which means they do the first 2 stanzas and the last 2 stanzas from Yamin Usmol and Boi V'Shalom, which sounds very odd because there's a message to this whole poem and it flows. And what you're doing is you're cutting something out. So what actually is being cut out? What's being cut out is actually the reference to the Galut. All those stanzas that bring about the pang of hardship, where we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, clean us up, get us out of the mess, rebuild, and all that, reminds us that we're in a mess, and we're dirtied by being in the Galut. All that is not there on Yom Tov night. Why? Because the Simcha of Yom Tov can't handle Avelut. Why does a person, Rahman al-San, who's sitting Shiva before Yom Tov, stand up from his Avelus right as the Yom Tov enters? And there's no continuation of the Shiva afterwards. Because Simchat Yom Tov doesn't mean gaiety. It means standing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'samachta b'chagecha. Samachta b'chagecha means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be with you. And when you're in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's soothing. Gam ki elech b'geit tzalmavet lo irara ki ata imadi. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us, it is soothing. And therefore, there's no reference whatsoever to being sad or being in mourning on Shabbat, on Yom Tov. And even though it's Shabbat, we will delete those sections of the Lecha Dodi that even led us to remind ourselves of those hard days. But the Rav said something very interesting. Similar to many times, and I know this from school administration, you have a teacher's lounge, a teacher's room, a teacher's lounge. So somebody's making a simcha, right? The biology teacher's making a simcha. He's not going to invite the whole staff. That's ridiculous. You're limited. You have to know who you know. Yeah, your best friends, your closest people at work-related friends you invite to the wedding. But you have to acknowledge it somehow. So you put an invitation up and in the luach, on the board, and in the teacher's lounge, and you're right. Na lirot et zeh kehazuna prata. See this as a private invitation. When I see that, I know one thing: don't come. Because if he wanted to invite me, or if she wanted to invite me, they would have invited me properly with an invitation. What is this all about? It's just a nice way of saying, you're invited, but don't come. But maybe I'll bring some schnapps and cake, the day after the wedding, and we'll say L'chaim and Mazel Tov and Shalom HaYisrael. The Rav said, Leil Shabbat, Yom Tov, we have a problem. We always invite Shabbat to our homes Friday night. That's what the Lecha Dodi is. But Yom Tov, we're not home. We're in Yerushalayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "V'kam tavalita." We have to go to Beit HaMikdash for Yom Tov. So how are you inviting Kadosh Baruch Hu to your home if you're not going to be there? So what do? We put up a sign: you're invited, but don't come. We say the first 2 and last 2 stanzas. The Rav said this not as a humoristic line. He thought it was a serious explanation. It's a type of watered-down explanation indicating to Kadosh Baruch Hu, don't bother coming because we're not home. We're in Beit HaMikdash tonight. Nevertheless, it's still Shabbat. So therefore, we remember that we should be inviting the Shekhinah to our homes for Shabbat. But the Ashkenazim, they don't like this. So they just deleted the whole business and just start Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbat. And as the Medrash says, Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbat, Liyom Shekulo Shabbat Unucha L'chayei Olamim. Ad kan.